and hit the recording. Great.
Recording is started.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Welcome to the September 13th meeting of the Issaquah Environmental Board. I'm Jamie Finch, and I'll be your chair tonight. Due to the hybrid nature of this meeting, we will have some members attending in person and others by computer or phone. For those attending remotely, or for meeting attendees attending remotely, please state your name each time before speaking. And once you are done, please mute your microphone. You'll please raise your hand if you have a desire to speak, and one of us in the room or someone online hopefully can tell us if we have missed it. For those in person, please, as we always do, tip your name tags to the side when you would like to speak. On certain topics, we'll summarize agreement around recommendations at the end of the topic and note if there's any dissent. I think from there we will have Stacy, do you want to take us through, or Chris, one of you two want to take us through attendance?
I can go ahead and do roll call, and apologies, I am having some tech issues, so if I computer goes nuts, I will just move to my phone, so bear with me. All right, so for roll call, Tom Anderson.
Here.
Nancy Davidson.
Here.
Jamie Finch.
Here.
Praj Gapandi. I believe Praj is planning to join us remotely. Joy Lewis.
Here.
Ashwin Kanan.
Here.
Ashwin Manoharan. Don McWilliams has an excused absence. Ann Newcomb.
Here.
Janet Wall. Dixie Bear.
Here.
And Alex Lee Tigner has an excused absence. Because we do have an action item on the agenda today, just wanted to note we do have 5 regular members here for that vote.
Great, thank you, Stacy. Next up, approval of the minutes. Were there any comments on the minutes that were presented in the packet? Hearing none, those are approved with by unanimous consent. Next up, we will move into public comments. I know we have several people signed up to speak. For those that are coming in remotely, obviously, please unmute your microphone. Stacy may need to do something to get you ready, but if not, please unmute your microphone when you're called on. State your name, address, and relationship to the city. Please try to limit your comments to 5 minutes, and then mute your microphone when done. I think with that, Stacy, if you could take us through public comment, that would be great.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, and I did want to just note that we had 3 written comments submitted from Andrew McClade, from Connie Marsh on the comp plan, and from Ann Fletcher on the comp plan. I believe we have Ann Fletcher and Connie Marsh here tonight that wanted to make public comment. So Ann,
and Stacy, we do have Jonathan in person to make comment as well.
Okay.
Great.
Great. Ann, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. All right. Well, good evening. It's nice to see you all. I first of all wanted to thank the sustainability staff and the environmental board for advancing the implementation of the Issaquah Climate Action Plan. And tonight, especially with municipal buildings and the sustainable purchasing policies. I really appreciate the work of creating this environmental stewardship climate resilience element. So mouthful, but in the comprehensive plan, and that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. I know that it's really complex because you're now integrating layers of the climate plan, this new state legislation, and other elements from the plan and other places, and then there's also evolving thinking going on all the time. So I know it's complex, and but I did work closely with the city on the plan, and PCA did. So I was really interested in the aspects of the plan that were being added to the comprehensive plan. I especially looked at the building and energy goal and policies, since that area is our biggest greenhouse gas emitter and a really difficult one to try to address and get somewhere on. Existing buildings are our biggest emitter within that area. That's a tough area. So when I was looking, I noticed that all but one of the climate plan building energy targets are being proposed for the comp plan. And to my dismay, the one missing target relates to existing buildings. The missing target says reduce natural gas and fossil fuel use in existing buildings by at least 20% by 2030 and 80% by 2050 compared to the 2017 baseline. And this is also a King County target, or at least it was at the time that we adopted it. None of the other building section targets cover this important area. And while the other targets like energy efficiency and net zero emissions in new buildings and municipal building decarbonization are super important, I don't think any of them rise to the level of drastically reducing natural gas and fossil fuel use in existing buildings. So it seems to me that if the other three are policy level, then an existing building target should also be included in policy. So further down, though, I did look to see if there was something else that might relate, and there was. I found one policy taken from the Climate Action Plan. That it was a strategy in the plan, though. It was not a target. And the strategy did relate to new buildings in part. This is strategy number 2, which is advance building decarbonization and ensure Issaquah is on track to meet state goals and requirements by shifting from natural gas to electricity in all new and existing buildings. Now, this strategy does mention state goals, but it does not specify a measurable target about existing buildings, similar to the other 3 climate plan targets that were converted into policies. So I think this connection to our climate action plan needs to be strengthened by adding a more specifically measurable policy relating to existing buildings. And I think there's several ways it could be done. The 2 that I thought of, and you might be thinking of other ways, but it could be that our Issaquah Climate Action Plan Target 3 that I previously read could be inserted as a policy. Or if that, because I'm not sure why it wasn't put in there, maybe it conflicts with a measurable state target or requirement. And if that's the case, then the state target would obviously override it, and that state specific state requirement could be added into land use policy G5 and just mention the specific target. And I think then this would clarify how this really crucial element of existing buildings from our climate action plan is being included at the policy level of our comprehensive plan. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm happy to, talk with other people or whatever about it later or after or some other time. But I just wanted to mention, I just saw it this afternoon and thought I better say something. Thank you. Oh, and I'm Ann Fletcher, 255 Southeast Andrews Street. And I'm also a facilitator for climate People for Climate Action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Next up, Jamie, we have Connie Marsh.
Hi, yes, I'm assuming you can hear me. Yes. So, and Clyde barking. So comprehensive, Connie Marsh, live on Squawk. Comprehensive plan has been fascinating because I've been watching the varying committees, commissions going through it. And one of the things that's of concern is that the code language that we have in most of our municipal codes reflects the need for guidance language in the comprehensive plan. And so in their introductory elements, they say, and as supported in the comprehensive plan, things like that. So Title 18 is an easy, great example, but what staff seems to be doing is stripping guidance language out of the comprehensive plan because they say that guidance language is in the code. So what that does is that creates this odd loop when you're reading the code and there's nothing supporting the specific language in the comprehensive plan. B, so where did it come from? What does it mean? It's not helpful. So often when you're dealing with the code, language is hard and you have to go back and say, you know, what really did that mean? You're supposed to go to the comprehensive plan, and that is supposed to give you the general concept of what you're aiming for. So I think we need to be careful not to strip that guidance language out of the comprehensive plan, because often we need it when we're doing implementation. Like for climate action, where and how are we supposed to get it done? Instead of just say, hey, we want to do it. Now, what does the comprehensive plan say? Does the comprehensive plan say that we're supposed to be looking at the school district, we're supposed to be looking at WashDOT, we're supposed to be figuring those things out with them in some sort of specific way? Are those climate goals Issaquah government, the city of Issaquah, private and public in Issaquah? I don't really know, because how do we get where we want to go if we have no control over WashDOT, we have no control over the school district, and we have very limited control over existing private development? So I need clarification. If we're going to set these goals, then how are we going to bring these other people to the table so that Issaquah can get to them? Comprehensive plan is the place to set those negotiations and our aims and efforts, because then when city council has to look at the school district proposal and say, well, you know, school district, we say we want this and you aren't giving us that. And while our code says you can do it, our comprehensive plan says that isn't really what we want you to do, so give us a little more. It gives us a negotiation tool to make things better until we can get the code to catch up with ourselves. So when you read this, just think to yourself, okay, from what I know, is this going to give enough guidance language for staff to make decisions? And I know it's really awkward and it's hard and you have to remember it all. And I apologize that it's so awkward, but please, if you can, thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Jonathan, now you are up.
Yeah. I want to ask a bit of protocol first. My statements have nothing to do with the content of the topics that you've just been discussing. Is that something that can be brought up, or is it some? Should I hold that for some other time?
Yeah, that's fine. You can feel free to comment.
Okay, my name is Jonathan Smith. I'll keep it short. My name is Jonathan Smith. I live at 1099 Northwest Glenwood Place in Issaquah. Been there about 25 years. I run a litter cleanup program in Issaquah. We meet monthly at the post office. I just want to note two observations that I have made, and I'd like just to talk about these for a minute and request that you email your state representatives, Ramos and Callan, plus Senator Mollett on these topics. The first one I've noticed recently is the plastic bag ban needs to be strengthened. Recently, our group is starting to see a lot of the new plastic heavyweight bags, the ones that are marked reusable, littering the community. Before that, I felt that the bag ban was doing a great job of reducing that solid waste in the community. But now businesses are rapidly working to kind of get around that law by producing bags that are heavier weight plus marked reusable. My statement is that my question for you is how many reusable bags does a household need? And I think 6 to 8, maybe 6 to 12 is all you need for years, right? We use the same reusable bags over and over. We don't need businesses to continually pump these bags into the environment. Okay, so my request there is that you would email your representatives, Callan and Ramos, plus Senator Mark Mollett, requesting them to revise that bag name. The second comment I want to make is that we desperately need a statewide container deposit bill for the next legislative session. We had one in this legislative session packaged into an environmental bill, and it was cut. And they have a lot of other things they're working on. We have a tremendous number of single-use containers, plastic bottles and aluminum cans that are littering our communities. And we are the only state on the West Coast that does not have a container deposit bill. Oregon was the first one to have it. It's had one for approximately 50 years. California has one. Hawaii has one. And British Columbia has one. I'm not sure if Alaska does. But again, I'd like you to email your state representatives, Bill Ramos and Lisa Callan, plus Senator Mark Mollett, and request that this be added to the next legislative session next year in 2024. It's a short session, so we need to get more people bringing this up. If these things are important to you, please take some action. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think, Stacey, that's all of our public comments, correct?
Jamie, we did have one other member of the public join, Steve Pereira. Steve, did you want to make public comment? All right, not hearing from you, Steve. If you do want to make public comment, go ahead and send me a note or send the group a note in the chat, and we can make some room for you later in the meeting.
Great, thank you, Stacey. So I think with that, public comment is closed. And we'll move on to our agenda items. The first one being Municipal Building Decarbonization Resolution.
All right. Can everyone see the presentation? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So I didn't change the name to Sustainable Buildings, which is an oversight on my part, but this presentation is similar to what I brought to you last week, a little bit updated since things, or last month, a little bit updated since things have continued to evolve over a month. And I'm going to go through it fairly fast since we did have some time to talk about it last month, but we have the time to kind of address any questions or thoughts as they arise. So presentation goals are to seek a board recommendation for advancing the municipal building decarbonization resolution, as well as to provide a space to update the board on existing facilities work, municipal building work, and answer any questions on that work. So again, buildings are the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the city. And so thinking about us as our municipal operations, really addressing the emissions coming from our buildings is really critical for us to reach our ICAP goals. So I wanted to recognize we did have time for a few questions last meeting, and so I wanted to kind of address those first. So I was able to update the resolution name to reflect that it is focused on existing municipal buildings.
Hey, quick question for you. Do you want to take questions as we go or leave them to the end?
I'm happy to take questions as we go on this one. So please let me know if there are questions because I don't have a super broad view. So the resolution name has been updated to reflect that it is focused on building decarbonization. That doesn't mean that we're not doing the decarbonization work for fleet and other facilities, but this resolution is focused on our existing municipal buildings. the energy audits that were referenced in the last presentation and that are kind of built into this whole process of thinking through how we can decarbonize our buildings and address energy use in our buildings. We are going to start with our larger buildings first because those are the largest largest energy users out of our existing buildings. So that's like our community center, our pool, the city hall and police department. However, the goal as part of this is to do energy audits for our smaller buildings and pair those with our decarbonization assessment to the best of our ability so that we are identifying the opportunities for reducing energy use and reducing greenhouse gas emissions from both our large buildings and our small buildings, because the greatest greenhouse gas emissions could be coming from a small building with a change of equipment. So we want to make sure we're kind of capturing that. But we are starting with the big buildings first. And then the last kind of question I wanted to address, I talked over with our staff, our facility staff. So pump stations are not currently part of this facility's, the facility condition assessment, and they are not part of the city decarbonization assessment. However, I've connected with our public works staff and our water utilities manager, and we're exploring doing an energy audit specifically for our pump stations and our water conveyance infrastructure. It's managed out of public works instead of our facilities team, which is kind of why they aren't happening concurrently, just because they are happening kind of in separate silos. We can still do the energy audits through some of the same systems that we were going to do the building audits, namely through some energy performance contracting with the state. So that's kind of a good news there.
David, we do have a question in person.
Yeah.
Hi, David. This is Nancy Davidson, and I think I'm the one that raised this. And this is a citywide resolution. It's not just being developed based on community facilities, though all these are community facilities. And I personally am troubled that we are not doing all the city buildings in this resolution. I think, granted, it's a different department than the ones that manage our facilities, but they're city-owned facilities paid for by ratepayers. Therefore, they should be subject to the same criteria. So if we are trying to say we're trying to be a green city, we are a green city. We're not just, the community facilities like the pool, but it also includes buildings like our pump stations and our lift stations and our other facilities. And I think we need to, I personally believe that we're not doing, why do this resolution if we're not going to do it for everything? What is the rationale behind separating out what Public Works is doing versus what all the rest of the city is doing? It's one city, it's overseen by a mayor, and in my opinion, it needs to be included in the resolution. They may use a separate contracting mechanism to do this. They may do it in a separate process. But the outcome and the measurements that we're trying to take to give to the public about what we're doing to try and decarbonize our footprint and to get to a greener environment includes all of the city's infrastructure. So personally, just so you know, I'm not going to support moving forward until we get a resolution that covers all city facilities. You just need to be aware of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Joy also has a comment.
I actually, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I have a question. I do want to echo that I have similar concerns to Nancy, and I was curious when I saw the exception. What other exceptions are there? I'm not sure if you got my question, David. I'd sent to Stacy, but I'm curious. We have a number of municipal buildings that are co-managed and owned for different services, and I'm curious, is there kind of a list, for instance, of things that were like, well, but the county manages that, well, but that's fire, so that's a whole separate thing. And I was curious, basically my question is, what's also not on the list? I imagine there's more than just our water conveyance and our pump house.
Question. I don't have a great sense on exactly what is not on the list. What is on the list for the decarbonization assessment currently is what is on the facilities condition assessment. So that would include almost all of our buildings, regardless on if we are the operator of those buildings. So for instance, that does include some buildings that are leased or rented from the city. I can do some digging to find out if there are other buildings that are not on the list. But I don't think there are going to be many, because I believe most of the everything other than kind of our utility, other than our utility structures and infrastructure, is managed by our facilities team.
Okay.
So
Thank you, David. That's super helpful. As a follow-up to my question, I would just say, I think I would be curious, though I do know that you want to have a vote on the resolution tonight, so I don't know that it's super helpful, but I think it would be interesting to have a list to know what structures are not included so that they don't slip past, right? And we are able to then be able to reach out to whatever team is managing them. And again, I know we have a lot of different partnerships that we have that extend through, and being able to make sure that there's a plan for a plan to be able to hit everything, if that makes sense. So thank you.
Thank you, Joy, and then Nancy, I think you will follow up.
So I know the city owns some houses in the city. I'm aware of a couple of them that they own. Are those included in this decarbonization assessment?
facilities team. So yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. You cut out. Sorry, David.
Yes, they are included.
So I would offer to you a suggestion of where you could find out all the buildings are located that the city owns. And one place is they should be all insured. The city has insurance. So if you get a copy of all the insured facilities by the city, you will be able to locate all the buildings that are under that. Just thought I'd offer that for you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I think I do have the full list of buildings operated. I think not on that list might be just some of that utility infrastructure. But I'll find those lists and figure out kind of what is not included.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Nancy,
And then as
Anne, sorry, Anne has a.
oh, please, yes.
So as far as the other infrastructure that's not on, was the original plan to have a separate resolution for that, or have a separate category for that? And do you know the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so the pump station infrastructure that is not on, there was not, I do not believe that there is the plan for a resolution at this time. We are developing our plan to do the work. And what I can explore doing is including our pump stations within the decarbonization scope of work. We'll have to see if the money that we set aside is enough for that for this current round. And if it's not, we would seek to do that in a future round. But as part of kind of the energy audits that we would do for our pump stations, that would look at kind of what is operating well, how can we improve the energy efficiency of the pump station motors, and then as well as if there's any decarbonization or energy efficiency options within the pump station buildings themselves. Although in talking with our water utilities manager, it seems like those buildings the buildings themselves don't generally use a lot of energy. It's mostly the pump station motors and that infrastructure that's the kind of the heaviest energy use in those stations.
Thank you, David. I also wanted to say that I really love the strong language. I really loved how you worded the resolution. It feels very strong and powerful.
Thank you.
All right, David, I think that's all the comments in the room here. I think you can.
So this this is, again, just kind of showing where we're looking here. There's the different avenues, and we're really focused on the existing municipal buildings. This is a non-complete list of some of the buildings work that we're doing. The highlighted ones are kind of what's included in this presentation. So the decarbonization assessment is focused on kind of the fourth highlighted bullet, but we are doing that in tandem with our facilities condition assessment, the energy benchmarking, and then preliminary energy audits. And then I also want to note that even though these are kind of all these assessments we're planning on doing this, that we are currently doing, and that will go through the rest of the fall and into winter and next year, that doesn't stop us from pursuing individual projects when we are able. So there are still decarbonization individual projects and preparing for things like renewable energy in the works, even at the same time as many of these projects. And the whole point of this effort is for our municipal buildings. By stacking all of these different types of assessments on top of each other, we should have a much better idea on what investments we can make, where, and when we will need to make them. Jamie submitted a great question around kind of how we currently prioritize projects. And my understanding is that there's a mix of different methods, and one of the big issues is what is in critical condition and what needs to be changed right away gets a lot of attention. But then there is kind of that long-term planning based on the CIP process. And some of the projects that have gone into the CIP process are based on the expertise of our facilities team, based on community priorities, and whether or not the projects have been kind of pushed down the line in the past. This whole process right now will give us a better sense of what actually needs to happen at any given point. So what pieces of equipment are really at their end of the life, or when that end of life will be. What pieces of equipment change out will provide us the greatest greenhouse gas emissions reductions, etc. Do I have any questions before I move on?
One note, David, we are getting close to the time we had allotted for this topic, so anything, obviously don't want to be too fast, but anything we can do to get through as quickly as possible would be great.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I'm going to skip these 4 slides, which kind of go a little bit more into depth into each one of the types of assessments we're doing, and skip to this, which is what is part of the municipal decarbonization resolution, municipal building decarbonization resolution. So it directs the city to inventory city facilities and evaluate feasibility of retrofitting existing buildings to become all electric by 2030. It directs the city to explore opportunities to collaborate with other entities, and it directs the city to make recommendations on next steps following the results of the layered assessments. So facilities condition assessment, energy audits, and decarbonization assessment. So this is just noting that even as we're doing these assessments, we're still pursuing individual projects. And so I am happy to bring it to the action stage. And I know Stacy has the resolution up. Is that still?
Yes,
Yep.
if we want to do any live edits.
So if there's any live edits, we can work on those now. And I'll stop sharing.
And just for a reminder on general process that we're going to follow, I think if there's any questions now, please ask questions now, or if you have any general comments at some point, we are taking action on this, so we will need a motion on the options that were provided, and then we'll have steps leading from that based on the type of motion that is, and any additional steps. So I think from there, I saw Joy, you had a comment or question.
I have a quick comment. Though I'm not voting, I would like to voice my support for this resolution. And I'd like to also make a comment that's to say that Not all electricity is green and friendly, and, where we get our energy matters. And while this resolution isn't necessarily the place to do that, I'd like to put a pin in our follow-up of having further language to be able to define where our electricity and how it's being generated, and being able to track that process through PSE, and not losing sight, because sometimes targets can feel really nice and they're not really where we want to go. So just wanted to, again, it's not related necessarily to the language we're voting on tonight, but it's a relevant part of it. Thank you.
Joy. Nancy, go ahead.
So David, in reading the resolution, section 1 states the city is directed to inventory city-owned buildings that use fossil fuels and evaluate the feasibility of retrofitting these existing city-owned buildings to become all electric by 2030. So that would include pump stations and lift stations. Those are city-owned facilities, in my opinion. So
I would agree.
So if we approve this, that will happen, right?
I believe so.
If it goes through council and gets approved. I just wanted to point that out. Throughout your presentation also, you said many points you pointed out that it was all city buildings. And so pump stations and lift stations are city buildings as well. So the only place that you kind of excluded those was on that one slide. That's why I'm asking all these questions, to try and get so I can support this. But it's my understanding, or else I have to amend this to make sure that it's clear that it's all city buildings, not just the ones that we all, like city halls and stuff. So am I correct in reading this resolution and what it states?
You are correct.
And there's no exclusions for pump stations anywhere else that I've missed in reading this, correct? In the resolution?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Are there any exclusions that I've missed in this resolution to exclude pump stations and lift stations owned by the city?
So there are no pieces that exclude pump stations or lift stations. One thing I will note, sorry, I apologize. I'm taking a look again. The decarbonization assessment, one kind of slightly funky thing is there are, I think, 1 or 2 buildings that are not going to be included based on future use of those buildings. Essentially, if they are surplused by the city in the very near future, or I think that's the main reason. So I think there are kind of that 1 or 2 buildings that would be excluded, and I know that's kind of separate from the pump station conversation, but I believe the way you're reading it, I would agree pump stations are included. They essentially are not included within the facilities condition assessment, but they would be included as part of the decarbonization assessment and that work.
Okay. And those buildings that are being surplused by the city that you talked about, I assume you put a timeline on those, like in the next year they would be surplused by the city and sold? Because I mean, the energy use is continuing in all of those buildings, so they have to be heated so that they don't have frozen pipes and things like that in the winter. And my concern is that, if you don't put a timeline on it, every building in the city will be surplus at some time.
Sorry, these are buildings that are surplused in the near future. I don't think I can say right now with confidence that it's exactly 1 year, but they are buildings that are being looked to be surplused soon.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so Joy's comments rung a bell with me, because in the material later on in the meeting, there is one of the points there, our policy, where it says achieve 100% renewable electricity by 2025 in municipal buildings. And so that would imply that we're going to be running on green electricity entirely by 2025, which is almost tomorrow. Is that?
Yes.
Am I reading this wrong, or?
You are reading it correctly. So the way we anticipate meeting that. We currently get around 98% of our electricity through the Green Direct program, which essentially allows the city to pay into and receive our electricity from renewable sources from PSE. So there's specifically a solar farm in Lund, I think, and then a wind farm. So we have currently 98% of our electricity needs are met by renewable sources, and we are figuring out the last 2%. And then as you know, this decarbonization assessment and this work kind of continues, our electricity use is likely to increase as we transition more equipment to electric, as we put in electric vehicle chargers, et cetera. So that's something that we're going to have to continue to monitor to make sure that that increased electricity demand continues to be met by either renewable energy on municipal properties or through programs like the Green Direct program.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple of comments. One is a question, and then probably will be a comment, but are air sealing, insulation, and other aspects of efficiency included in the assessments?
Sorry, I forgot to respond to that. Yes, that's included in energy audits.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's critical because I do think, and it also, I think we should make sure we don't think about these just as the decarbonization, it being that in itself, because I do think that one implication of a lot of like heat pumps, for example, is getting buildings that are efficient is incredibly important, where you can oversize a gas boiler. You can't do that, or if you do it, it's much more expensive on a heat pump. So I do think that that's going to be a really important element. I don't recall seeing that as detailed, and is that currently mentioned in the resolution?
Not oversizing equipment, or
no, the like insulation, air sealing, and efficiency aspect.
It is not, because and this is, I think, kind of one of just the funky aspects of how this has been done. This resolution is focused on the decarbonization assessment, and the air insulation, weatherization, that type of stuff would be part of the energy audits, which are a slightly separate assessment.
Okay, so this resolution is just covering the first step, or the first step of the process. It's not actually committing the city to doing the other steps.
It is right. It's committing the city to do the decarbonization assessment, which is actually in kind of the scheme of facilities work. It's the last piece, right? So before this comes the energy audits, which is helping us think about how do we reduce our energy use first off. And then the decarbonization is thinking how do then we transition the equipment to all electric or reduce or eliminate fossil fuel use.
Yeah, I do think I understand why we have done it this way, but it feels like an important aspect that at least should be mentioned. So it sounds like we're going to do it, but just would question whether we should have that included as in the resolution. And then related to another question, as part of, and I don't know what step this would be of, are we going to be doing an evaluation of, like, say you have a given system, it could either be replaced as is, like by the current in place system, so like a gas boiler, or it could be replaced by some like heat pump or some other electric heating device. Is there going to be like a comparison of those two? Like, are we just going to be generating the kind of option of, like, if we were to go electric, what would that look like?
Yeah, and I apologize, I forgot to answer this as well. But so we are going to get cost. So as part of the facilities condition assessment, we will get cost estimates for equipment replacement, generally with what that current equipment is at the end of life. As part of the decarbonization assessment and energy audits, we'll have cost assessments for, you know, new pieces of equipment that reduce our energy use and that decarbonize our buildings. I do not think we have no plans to kind of do that comparison assessment for all equipment across our buildings. I think it is perfectly likely, and it's a great idea to be kind of doing some of that assessment, especially for some of our bigger pieces of equipment that might have kind of greater impact. So for instance, changing out a gas heating equipment to a heat pump, kind of exploring kind of what the differences are there. But we do not have currently like a system to report out on that, what was and what we're going to do. Other than, I should note, the municipal greenhouse gas inventory that we're currently doing. So we have one for 2022, and the idea is to keep doing those every 2 years. So hopefully the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions would be reflected in that as time goes on.
Yeah, and I think this is probably beyond the scope of what we're covering in this resolution. I do think as we get to implementation, it's going to be important to not say the total project cost is specific to decarbonization. Like there would have had to be a new system replacing the HVAC in a given building. So any cost that's associated with decarbonization as part of that is really only any incremental cost. And so I do think there's going to be something like thinking about that, not only for how it's kind of positioned and communicated in budgets and to the public, but also in how we make decisions, because I do think that we're going to need to make calls on where to best invest our funds, and the combination of what's the cost difference and what's the carbon difference should be like that ratio is an important one, I would say, and should be something that is an output of whatever we're creating here, hopefully, to help everyone within the city to make the investments that make the most sense and have the most impact. So just would encourage that as part of the later stages of the process.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Nancy, it looks like you have.
Just one quick question. This includes the fire stations, right? They're in the assessment?
David, we didn't hear you.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay, thank you, so.
Sorry about that.
Are there any other questions or comments? All right. Are there any members want to put forth a motion on the resolution at hand that David has presented?
To approve the resolution as presented and discussed in this meeting.
Thank you. Do we have a second for motion? Thank you,
Second.
Ann. We have a second from Ann. Now we will open it up for questions and discussion. After that, if there aren't any other amendments, we'll vote, but if there are additional amendments, we may have additional steps to the process. So right now we're not voting. Please let us know if there's any questions or comments on the motion that Nancy made. Nancy, please go ahead.
The one thing I did point out earlier is that I didn't think I could support it, but based on our conversation that it does include all city buildings, I will be supporting it. That's why I made the motion, and I appreciate the clarification, David. Thank you.
Of course, and I apologize. It's a little confusing, and I'm figuring it all out as we go a little bit. So thank you for your clarifications as well.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, I think then we'll be voting on the motion to what was the language?
To approve the resolution as written and as discussed during the meeting.
All right. So I think it would be great, Nancy, if you could take us through a roll call vote. Sorry, Nancy, Stacy. Sorry. Saying lots of letters.
Sorry, just for clarification too, Jamie, I'd sent you some language. My understanding, and Chris can jump in here too, is council doesn't do a lot of resolutions, but I believe what we're looking for is the board to make a recommendation to council for approval. So we would be advancing the resolution to council, just to clarify. So I don't know if we need to amend the motion or if it's okay for the board to approve it and staff take that as meaning we then advance it to council. I will defer to the board on what they would like to do.
I think what would need to happen is someone would propose an amendment to them. If we would like to make that clear, someone would propose an amendment and we would accept that amendment. The board feels that's the right direction.
I'll withdraw my motion. Hey, just make me a motion. I'll withdraw. Want to do it for a second? For a second.
Okay, I'll withdraw in a second.
All right.
Okay.
Do we have any motions on the issue at hand?
I don't know what she wants us to say.
Daisy, do we have language somewhere in the?
Yeah,
document?
sorry.
It's right here. It says
I emailed it late to you today. Yeah, I think we're looking for the board to approve the resolution to advance to council.
I think this is it. I recommend council adopt the municipal building decarbonization resolution as is.
That works.
Isn't that it?
Okay, thank you.
That works.
Thank you, Ann. Now, do we have a second?
I'm a non-voting member, I'm just trying to
I'll
help.
second it.
I second that.
Thank you. So now, any discussion on that motion that Ann just stated? No discussion. Now I think we can move to a roll call vote. Stacey, could you take us through that?
Yes, I'll do a roll call vote of the regular members. You can say aye or nay. Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Nancy Davidson,
Aye.
Jamie Finch,
Aye.
Praj Gapandi,
I.
Ashwin Kanan,
Aye.
and Newcomb.
Aye.
And I believe that is all of our regular members that are present. Please speak up if I missed you.
Great. Well, I think the motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Anything else that you need from us on this topic, David?
I think I have the information I need. I will keep the board updated with progress as this work continues. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I think with that, then we'll move to you probably talking some more, which is the sustainable purchasing policy. You get no break.
I do apologize. You have a lot of me tonight. So I'll go through that. I know we're kind of a little delayed on time, so I'll go through this. And I would ask for this presentation that we save comment or questions until the end of the presentation. So the sustainable purchasing policy has been moved forward quite a bit since I last brought this to the board. It was identified in the Issaquah Climate Action Plan, and it recognizes that the products and services that the city purchases have inherently social, environmental, and economic impacts at their time of purchase and throughout their life cycle. It is going to be, when adopted, it will be an internal policy and an implementation guide that goes along with the policy. And because it is internal and not council approved, that would allow it to be more flexible, be updated, be improved as time goes on, which is, I think, one of the strengths of that method. Where will the policy make a difference? Simply put, the goal is it will make a difference everywhere throughout the city. All departments make procurements. All departments have folks who buy things on a regular basis. So this policy and the implementation guide recognizes that implementation will take time until every single item and service procured by the city is fully integrated with the policy, but we are committed to that, and there's a lot we're going to do to try and make sure that the sustainable purchasing policy is integrated throughout the city. There are a few kind of key opportunities here. So for instance, vehicles is one, right? We purchase quite a few vehicles at the city, and this policy strengthens the argument for purchasing more environmentally friendly vehicles. Public works is another one. So there are a lot of projects, capital projects, and operation purchases from Public Works. And I've met quite a few times with our Public Works managers about this policy, and they've noted that a lot of the procurement that has happened in the past at Public Works sometimes just happens because that's what's been done in previous times. And so by implementing this policy, by having the training, and by working very closely with our staff, we hope to kind of shift infrastructure projects so projects across the city. And then, it'll even align very closely with office supplies. So thinking about what paper we buy, thinking about what equipment we're buying for the daily use of our offices. The policy implementation is going to rely on a lot of, it's going to rely on, most importantly, staff support and buy-in. We wanted to build a policy that had staff excited and interested to apply it, and had staff bought into the idea of taking the time and the effort to think about how to apply a sustainable purchasing policy. We are going to have staff trainings. We're going to have specific department support, so that will entail me going out to departments and talking about their individual purchases, supporting them on that individual scale. We're going to build tools and resources. I have a few listed. And then we're going to have a lot of procurement templates that are going to integrate pieces of the sustainable purchasing policy into them. And then right now, our implementation guide lays out a number of different evaluation and tracking methods that we're planning on implementing, which will allow us to measure to the best of our ability how we are doing at implementing this policy. So current stage, the policy and the implementation guide are currently out for feedback from staff. And then I'm coming to you all again. I'm calling it version 1.5 because we wrote a draft policy, and then for some key internal stakeholders, we got some updates. And so this is version 1.5. So the next steps are, we're going to revise the policy, we're going to seek adoption, and then most importantly is that implement, monitoring, tracking, and continuing to revise to make sure that we continue to have as strong a policy as we can here, and continue to focus on areas of improvement within our procurement. Our policy timeline, we're kind of in that fall, that phase 3 right now, getting input on the draft policy. And then we are hoping to adopt later this fall, and then right away begin implementation. So the focus for the environmental board tonight, and the main thing that I wanted to ask for feedback on, are on the environmental guiding principles. So the guiding principles matter for the policy because these are the pieces that we are asking, these are the statements that we're asking staff to apply whenever they are making a purchasing decision. Applying the guiding principles will look different depending on the purchase, right? If you're purchasing food for an event, applying the guiding principles in that sense is different than applying the guiding principles for an infrastructure project. The guiding principles will inform and be incorporated into RFPs, RFQs, contract templates. We're currently working with our city attorney as well as our finance staff to figure out kind of exactly how we're going to be building those out. But the goal is that for the most part, as we send out procurements and as we create contracts or enter into contracts, that it will be very clear to whoever we're working with that these are our guiding principles and this is what the city cares about. And then when we are evaluating our RFP responses, RFQ responses, etc., there's going to be specific questions asking staff to evaluate those vendors based on their compliance with the guiding principles. So the way that we are doing this is we have an overarching environmental guiding principle that is essentially going to be used as shorthand for the rest of the guiding principles in some spaces when we need to kind of save space. But so this is the overarching environmental statement. And I'll give you all a moment to read this. Okay. And then we have detailed environmental guiding principles. And I have a lot on the board. I believe they're all in your board packets. So we'll come back to this slide when we want to talk about these. But the real questions I have for the environmental board tonight are: what feedback does the environmental board have on the overarching guiding principle, that first italicized slide, and then the detailed guiding principles? And then specifically, is there anything missing from these guiding principles that should be added? And I will now open it up to comments, and I'll kind of leave it on this slide for now unless we go to the overarching environmental principle statement.
Thank you, David. Any comments or questions from the board? Tom, go ahead.
Yes, Tom Anderson here. So just on the first bullet there, reduce and eliminate the use of toxins and hazardous chemicals. I'm just wondering how this balancing act will be implemented. I mean, I know the city uses toxic chemicals for invasive weed control, and this has been determined to be the most practical way of dealing with certain things, problematic things like blackberries. Is this going to be, are we going to turn away from all that based on this document, or is there some other ouch in there somewhere that says, oh, well, unless it's inconvenient or unless it's not cost effective to do what we really want to do? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, great question. So the sustainable purchasing policy leans very heavily on guidance, recognizing that the breadth of what we purchase at the city is very wide, and when it gets down to the specifics of any individual purchase, there are a lot of trade-offs and complexities into what is the best thing to purchase. And so when this policy says something like reduce or eliminate the use of toxins and hazardous chemicals, that does not necessarily mean that we are going to completely do away with toxins or hazardous chemicals if they are deemed as the most appropriate way to, for instance, deal with blackberries. However, what this will do is support staff and encourage staff to look for alternatives wherever possible.
Okay, thank you.
Joy, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Gosh, Tom, I appreciate you bringing this up. I think blackberry is such an excellent thing that we should all be keeping in mind when we see neighbors and members of our community picking fruit and reminding ourselves of the pesticides that we regularly spray in critical areas. So just to go after this first one, I do believe that guidance is the right way to go. I would love to see language strengthened to talk about the disposal of our products. That's something I brought up the last time. I do appreciate that this language has been strengthened in this 0.5 draft. I do think it might be worth calling out your example, David, of like when the city does an event with food, right? Is food being separated, leftover food that isn't used, is it being separated from its containers, and is it being properly composted? Rather than just being thrown away in, as a whole thing. I think that there's room to strengthen language on this while still staying with guidance. I had sent some comments, and I think one way to do that is with our ever favorite bureaucracy. Let's do more tracking. I think there's an accountability piece that could be put in of asking departments to clarify, why did you not follow this policy? You made a different choice, and we'd like to track why you did that. And there should be a form where they're required to say every time they don't do it, why was that not the case? And then we'll be able to further follow, are we seeing trends in our purchasing of where it's being deemed too hard, or we're deciding that like for instance, the cost, right, rather than paying for the labor to remove an invasive species and instead spray toxic pesticides in our watershed, we've made that choice, right? And we should own that choice, and we should then not be sweeping it under the rug. So I think that there's an opportunity to be shedding more light for the public on these guiding principles and still keeping them guidance by having further reporting. I think it would also be fair that every time that maybe, for instance, that's done, the public is alerted, right? There should be a sign that says, the city of Issaquah has sprayed hazardous chemicals here, right? And we might get a better response from our community if they were more aware of when we're making choices that more benefit an economic side than necessarily a health and side. So I think that there's an interesting component to staying guidance, but still being able to collect relevant information for us to be able to move forward and say, in our procurement, why are we making the choices that we're making so that we can be making better choices down the road?
Just to respond to that real quickly, I think that is a great point, and that is something that I'm trying to be very cognizant of, is that, right, if we put this together and then we aren't tracking things, it's not going to it's not going to lead to the change that we want, right? Currently, we do have an evaluation system put in place, or we will be putting in place an evaluation system to look at purchases on a yearly basis. That's a little bit more frequent than what some other jurisdictions do, which kind of focuses more on the every other year basis. And the other kind of just note on that is, I think there's the opportunity to identify certain practices that we want to look into, either through the environmental board or identification by the sustainability team or whatnot. But most of the evaluation is going to focus on kind of higher cost purchases, that recognizing that bigger purchases are likely going to have a bigger environmental impact. Just recognizing staff capacity to go through every purchase that we make. So
It's a relevant point, right? When we talk about resources, right? And so what you want to do is you want to make the environmental choice be the easier choice in a sense, right? And so the idea is to say, well, if I'm having to use staff resources to be able to complete these things, to do all this owner's paperwork for tracking, maybe it would actually be more cost effective to do the other solution, right? There's a mechanism, as somebody who ran corporate procurement for a while, at a major corporation, when you want to go through outside of other channels, you need to justify that, right? These are our vendors. Why are you doing it this other way, right? And there's all these different paths to get to your spot, but you learn how to be able to get what you need as quickly as possible. What we need to do is to reframe our procurement to say, this is as big a value as your budget, right? And so being able to realign that in a way that hasn't happened within the administration, certainly in the decade that I've been on the scene. So I think that there is a way to add a component where we bring in our stakeholders in a way that says, you need to stand by your choices. If you're choosing this, obviously, then you need to make that choice, and that's fine, but you need to own it in a way that we have daylight on it so that we can know this is our pain point. We see time and time again, this isn't working for us. So how do we know how to unkink this? Because right now we don't really have any kind of visualization into that within the administration, I'm saying, to be able to track that. So food for thought.
Thank you for that point. I have that as a note, and we'll kind of explore opportunities to raise up those examples of where things are used and not used. Raj, I see your hand is up.
We actually, David, we had Nancy in person. I actually had a comment. I was going to make a question and a comment. Nancy, then Praj.
Great, sorry about that.
I noticed in the full text there was a social equity and economic section. Are those net new being added at the same time, or are those existing sections that this aspect is just being added to?
The entire policy is new. So the equity sections and the economic sections are also new. I thought for the purposes of this board, I would focus on the environmental guiding principles. But if you have thoughts on the others, I'm open to that as well.
Yeah, so it's not that I have specific opinions on the other ones. What I think is important about all those other elements being included is there's a ton being added to city staff right now. Like there's a long list of considerations that they have to take into consideration. I do understand that there's limits to what we can do with a policy like this. You can't make it too onerous. You have to get the support of the staff. I think this is going to be difficult for anyone to know, like all the different ways that they need to thread a purchase through. So I do agree with Joy that in a lot of cases, I don't even think this is necessarily going to be that they didn't want to do the right thing. There's just a lot to take into consideration. So I do think being really thoughtful about how staff is reviewing, it probably is, it's obviously not every transaction, but how are you getting not only just the big dollar ticket ones, but each team is getting some review? Like how are you spreading it out and kind of mixing in your reviews so that there's more than just the top big purchases that are being reviewed. The other thing that I think should be considered is whether for items that are either above a certain dollar figure or that have a useful life of us like more than a year, that there's additional considerations that are put into place. I worry that something like a vehicle that is not only expensive, but also has potentially a 10-year useful life, that shouldn't be getting the same level of scrutiny as someone buying pencils for the office. So I do think that what I worry about is there's no teeth in this at all right now, I guess is my read, like, and I understand why that's the case, but I do think there's certain situations that justify some teeth, that there should be accountability when we're making these type of decisions. And so I think having really selective places where we know it's important to put additional guidelines or additional checkpoints to make sure that those really big ticket things go the way that we're intending, or that we're at least capturing the decision process so we know why it didn't go the way we wanted to is something to consider. And that's how, Nancy, go ahead.
Hi, David. So I wanted to talk about the way these are worded. And the reason I'm pointing this out is I like the first one, which is the reduce or eliminate the use of toxins and hazards. But the second one starts with support efforts to minimize. And can we potentially consider just starting with minimize resource consumption and reduced waste? It's a stronger statement. I mean, these are just guiding principles pretty much. And so they may choose to do something different. But the support really is kind of a weak statement, in my opinion. And so I also think encourage the use is also a fairly weak statement. I'm just pointing that out. I think the concept's right. What I'm looking for is stronger verbiage on the front, or to take those qualifiers out. So you're really making a positive statement to them. Or consider the life, it's not just consider, they really should be looking at, making decisions based on life cycle costs to both from extraction to disposal and impacts to the environment. So, I think it's got to be, you've got to tie back in that environmental piece on the life cycle costs, because typically the impacts to the environment has no life cycle cost when you're doing something like this, but it really does have an impact along the way. And so that's kind of missing in that particular bullet. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of going through each one. But I think adding an environmental piece to the life cycle cost, because everybody just says there's no cost to what we're doing to the environment, but that's not true. The next bullet is very strong, reduce. That's something, very positive. The last piece, it's very hard, but, if you could put a stronger word in that review and, select vendors that reduce their, so you're really saying, make the environment just as big a piece as what they're giving to you. And so that's just my encouragement to you. And I think that last bullet, I'm not sure what you're getting to. There's a lot of words in there that I don't understand. But it would be helpful if you would kind of clarify, because if I was a staff person, I'd look and say, don't know how to do this, don't know what it means. So anyway, that's just my feedback on the specifics of the policies. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Nancy.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go
And
ahead.
I think,
Sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say, absolutely. I think for the most part, strengthening the ones that you mentioned, that should be easy to do. And then the last bullet is kind of confusing, and it is expanded upon in the implementation guide that really kind of goes into what those eco labels are and kind of how one would look for those.
Thank you, David. Raj, go ahead.
Hi, David. So I had a question or comment which is kind of connected or relevant to what Jamie was saying. When I'm looking at this specifically, you know, the bullet point where it says review environmental practices that vendors, manufacturers, or contractors have incorporated into their office or production process. My question was, and my guess is probably you do not have, but usually any cities or companies will have their own preferred vendor list. So what they do is whether the vendor has a project or not, they basically send them through the scrutiny of, do you have this? Do you have this certification? Do you have this insurance? What not? If they meet the requirements, and keep them in the preferred vendor list so that, you know, when an opportunity or project comes up, they don't have to vet them again. They just pick them up and see if if they can do the project and the estimate seems right, they will just pick them up instead of wasting time at that moment. So my question was, do you have any kind of preferred vendor list for, you know, the city, and is environmental practices added as a component for the preferred vendor list?
Question. Generally, no. We do not have preferred vendors list for the city. It is revamping kind of how we do our procurement. That this is coming at a good time because we are revamping a little bit of how we do our procurement. We're thinking about other tools within our finance department. And so it's not out of the question that down the line in the nearish future we'll have a preferred vendor list, at least for some types of procurements or some types of items, in which case this purchasing policy would be integrated into that.
So I had a suggestion on that. So basically, you know, the preferred vendor list, or, you know, for I have worked in the labs, and the labs typically have their standard operating procedures for, you know, any IIT, ISO certifications, or they will have the SOP guides, you know, and every time they have a new procedure or anything included, they have a standard operating procedure included for a new step or any new equipment or whatnot. So my suggestion would be, you know, down the line, and this may not be a part of the sustainable purchasing policy, but maybe considered as an extension of it, where actually, you know, you can get an input from the staff or actually the employees who will be, you know, trying to get these sustainable products or sustainable practices implemented for city work. So get input from them and come up with some kind of standard operating procedures or preferred vendor list down the lane, so that, as Jamie said, you know, there won't be chaos by everybody trying to, you know, find for every single purchase what is the best way to handle it. There will be some guidance already available by using the research by the staff in the city itself, so that, you know, it's easier and you will find a smoother implementation basically of that. Otherwise, and especially for bigger purchases or bigger equipments, you know, higher value items, you may definitely want to do that. That will save you a lot of time in crunch time projects, or, you know, delays in the projects being processed.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Raj. Do we have any?
That would be-
I see a
thank
hand
you.
still up. Is there anyone else?
I think that's Dixie.
Oh, that's Dixie. Oh, Dixie, please go ahead. I can't see your name, but
Oh, thank you. Hi, David. I just have two things I just want to echo that I agree. Also, I think the languaging would be helpful to be a little bit stronger. And then just a thought. I'm wondering if, because you're talking about people who are buying everything from food to cars to, you know, whatever, I'm wondering if it would actually be helpful that instead of it being just a list of things to consider, if it was more of an order of operations. So maybe they need to be listed, because for some of these, like if I'm buying food for an event, some of these really don't apply. And if maybe it's helpful for people making, looking at guiding principles, to think more like to be able to start at the top of the list and say, oh yeah, this is where I should start. Like, to me, considering the end of life of the product is actually probably the first thing we should be thinking about. I know that's helpful for me when I'm making decisions in my business about what to buy, because that's easy. Like, oh, how am I going to get rid of this? Oh, I can't get rid of it. So maybe I need to look at other options. And maybe that's impossible. Maybe it's too hard to order them, but maybe ordering them will actually help people be able to make some decisions differently without getting overwhelmed by the principles. That's just a thought.
It's a great point. I will point, so the part of the idea with the overarching environmental guiding principle is that to provide an entrance into the policy where somebody can kind of focus on this kind of shorter description of what the environmental guiding principles are getting at. And if somebody, say, makes a purchase based on the overarching principle first, they, based on our implementation guide, we do expect them to go to kind of the more detailed guiding principles for future purchases. And there are a few in the implementation guide, there are a few other tools and suggestions for kind of how to deal with the fact that there are a lot of guiding principles, and it's very difficult to kind of hold all of them together when you're making a purchase of a leaf blower or something, any purchase that there might be. However, I do appreciate the suggestion for any sort of ordering, and I'll definitely take a look back at this to see if there's kind of opportunities for ordering of any of the environmental guiding principles.
All right, thank you, David. I have one final comment, and it relates to my first question slash comment. I think the main goal of this policy was to support ICAP with. Is that correct? That the main purpose of this was to support like purchasing for sustainability or in support of the climate action plan? Is that a fair statement? Or is it?
I think I would say the point is to improve our purchasing practices, and it was the impetus for the policy came out of the ICAP.
Okay. Because the one thing that, if you just look at the real estate, currently less than half of the bullets of like policies are actual are specific to the environment. And I think anyone that's done a presentation or written anything knows like the more things you put, the less focus each one gets. Mm-hmm. And so I just do want to not to say that it just to be really thoughtful about what we are including, because you put too much in and you get nothing. And so I do think that how we are succinct and make sure that we're focusing people on what's most important, because I think that's another thing that's missing is there's a ton of things listed here. What's most important is not clear. And so how do I know where I should focus if I'm looking at this as a staff member is not really that clear. And so I do think that an important part of this is maybe it's not in the policy itself, it's something that staff are getting on a yearly basis. These are the priorities within this list for this year that we should be thinking about. But right now, it feels like a list that's too long to actually be that useful. And so I think that's a challenge that either through a process or through how this is structured should be considered for whatever final version there is.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I think that's a difficult balance to make sure we're not excluding any considerations, but also making sure that it is useful to staff. Because again, that's really the crux of it.
And I think the priorities is something that I think is important. I understand we have a lot of things listed. The priorities is a piece that I think we don't provide guidance on very clearly right now between all of those. Which one do we want to make sure staff focuses on is not clear.
Thank you.
Dixie, I think, is your hands up again, or is that the same hand raised?
Same hand raise.
Okay,
Sorry.
cool. All right, wanted to make sure, and I don't see any other comments. Oh, sorry, Joy.
Thank you, Chair. Jamie's comment made me think, David, of kind of actually reframing this a little bit when we're thinking about what we want. I think it would be very interesting to have you fly this past the equity board. When we think about restorative justice, we think about, well, what can I do to make it better, right? And how our city uses our dollars is an excellent way for us to back up our beliefs in our community. And so being able to kind of maybe take the opposite approach of saying, what's the vendors we don't want to use, right? What are the things that we don't want to promote, right? It's easy to say, when I'm doing an event in the office, I don't want to have a plate that's covered in plastic, right? I want something that's compostable. It's actually compostable. This isn't just marked compostable, right? Thank you for all that wonderful training we had recently at Cedar Grove and Recology. But it's an interesting way to also think about the other hand of this, that I think that this policy could be a little bit richer and a little bit more in depth if we think about what vendors we are using, for instance. It might be really easy to run down to the Dollar Tree, but is that really what we want to be supporting in our community, right? So it might be worth looking at this from an equity lens to be able to strengthen this as a fuller picture.
Excellent. Just on that note, I have been to the equity board for this policy. There are specific equity guiding principles in this, as well as an social equity overarching guiding principle. And the plan is to go to the equity board again.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, I think that is everything for this topic. Is that, oh, I see Dixie has a new hand raise.
Sorry, thank you. Just one more thing. I would actually, and I didn't know if you were going to go back to overarching, but in the overarching, I think it would actually be important to call out end of life in the overarching. Since that's a pretty large way to make a big difference.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Dixie. I think that, is that everything you guys need on this topic? Anything else to cover?
I think that's all I needed. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, David. With that, we will move to our next agenda item, comprehensive plan, climate resilience and environmental stewardship element. I do want to note that it's 8 p.m. tonight. I think we are holding to our 8:30 timeframe pretty closely. So there's a good likelihood that discussion, we may not be able to cover all the materials. I believe Stacy, and you can cover this if you'd like, but I think the recommendation from Stacy was going to be that for any materials that we don't get through or topic areas that we don't get through, that board members follow up via email after the meeting, as we don't want to go beyond 8:30 tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, that's my suggestion. We treat this kind of as a introduction overview of the full environment element, and then environmental board members, if you all agree, then could send me directly their comments. We will incorporate those into a second draft of the element and bring that back to you in October. We'll need to determine if that's part of our regular meeting or if we might need to schedule a special meeting, because the element is scheduled to go in front of a council committee, I believe late this fall, early winter. So we'll want to keep on that time track. So that's the proposal. We'll just kind of introduce the element, take some initial questions or feedback, and then the board can send us written comments. Does that sound okay, Jamie? Great.
Yeah, Stacey, how much time do you need for the other sections, the reports, just so we know that we're kind of managing to that?
2 minutes.
Okay, cool.
Great. All right. Bear with me here. Okay, that is, I don't know why it pulled up that. Just one moment. Let me.
I think I did say that.
All right, sorry, trying to get it up on the right screen here. Oop, that is not what I wanted either. Hold on.
Stacey, do you want me to present?
Sure. It's trying to take over both screens when I go to presentation mode, so that would be great.
Here you are.
Great. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. All right. I think David is working to pull up the presentation.
Oh, there we go.
Great. Thank you so much. So a lot of what we're gonna say in the presentation tonight, we have shared with the board before. We just want to reiterate a lot of it as we move into the first review of really what we see as the complete or full climate resilience and environmental stewardship element. So tonight we are looking for feedback on those goals and policies included in the element. We'll see how far we get tonight and then look forward to your written feedback. Next slide. So what we are specifically what we're looking back for feedback on is whether or not staff accurately captured the comments you provided at our last meeting for the draft goals and policies that you saw in August, and then also feedback on what are new additions for you. And those are either goals or policies that we've pulled in from other elements, or they're new goals and policies for the comp plan that are focused on climate resilience. Next slide. So just as a reminder, you've seen this slide probably 3 or 4 times at this point, but the comprehensive plan is that high-level 20-year vision for the community that's setting goals and policies. Those goals and policies are then carried out through the functional plans, such as the ICAP. That is where we have the real more specific strategies and actions for implementation of those plans. And the next slide just emphasizes again, it shows that intersection of the comp plan and functional plans where they share those goals and policies, the comp plan being that much higher level vision and the functional plan really getting into that more detailed implementation. And I should say, Jamie, it'd be great if we could just hold questions to the end since we're short on time. Also, as Stephen has shared with this group, what is new this round with the comp plan is working to incorporate legislation, House Bill 1181. As we've shared before, the city is actually not required to incorporate these new components to the to the comp plan this year. We aren't required to until 2029, but these are really important components, and so we are working to incorporate as much as we can with this update of our comp plan, particularly looking at the greenhouse gas sub-element and the resiliency. And then next, we're just going to walk through where the board has been on this journey. So starting back in April, Stephen talked to us about what is a comp plan, what process would we be going through, and the board provided some feedback on what would go into the new environment element. In July, we talked about a proposed title, and we have a working title for the environment element, which is Environment, Stewardship, and Climate Resilience. And then we also talked about the level of content that would be incorporated into the element in terms of goals and policies. In August, we sought feedback on goals and policies that we had brought in from other elements to the new environmental stewardship and climate resilience element, and then staff worked to incorporate that feedback. So again, today what we're looking at is the revised version or the updated version of the new element. We have made some revisions to how we've structured this element that are shown up here. And just an example too of what we're going to see in this element versus what we have left in the other elements. In the new element, we have brought in the transportation greenhouse gas reduction goals and policies. But detailed goals around walking, biking, those are going to remain in the transportation element. For resilience, To climate emergencies, we've brought that into the new element, but any specific policies related to, for instance, working with utilities on resilience elements efforts, those will be remain in the utility element. So today, we just wanted to give you, we wanted to give you a preview of what's coming and what you're not seeing today. So today are the updates to the what we're calling shorthand environment element, because our working title is quite long. But what we want to let you know what's coming in October, those will be resilience and climate change related policies that will remain in other elements, such as in transportation or utilities. Stephen will bring us those at our next meeting. They are still being worked on by staff. So we're really focused today just on what lives within the environment element. So just diving into a little bit more detail of what is in front of you. We've made refinements, again, just to reiterate, we've made refinements to goals and policies based on board feedback. We've brought in additional goals and policies from other elements, such as transportation. And then we've developed new goals and policies around resilience, taking into consideration feedback that the board has provided over the last several months. Again, we are not looking right now at other climate change, resilience, or sustainability policies that will live in the other elements. Those are going to be discussed in October. This is really what we see as the full, complete draft environment element, knowing that there's probably a lot of feedback and work we need to do on the goals and policies. I was going to then just flip over to the timeline so you all have an idea of where we're headed. I think it's the very last slide, if we have that, or I can just mention it. I mentioned what we will be doing. I think it is the very last slide, but it's okay, David, I can just mention it. In October, again, we'll be looking at those policies that will live in other elements. Council will be beginning to review comp plan recommendations later in the fall, and then be working towards approval of the comp plan by mid to late year next year. So this is not the only time the environmental board will touch this element or look at the other elements. We have quite a bit of time for feedback. As we mentioned, we'll schedule some additional time as needed to dig in further to the environment element, as well as we'll have most of our next meeting dedicated to the comp plan. So with that, we can take questions just on overview or general questions on the presentation, and then we can move into any initial feedback on goals and policies for 10 minutes or so, and I can bring those up.
Thank you, Stacy. Then we're going to start with general questions and then maybe move into people have more specific feedback. And I'll kick us off on general comments. Stacey, I emailed you about this. I do think, while it's, I understand that in October we'll review the transportation, some of the other elements. I do think, given the importance of buildings and transportation in our overall goals, any board that is going to be working in depth on the comp planning sections that are associated with those sections, I would hope are very intimately aware and familiar with the ICAP. And if that's not the case, that seems like a really important resource for them as they go into doing what we're doing. So I think we'll do our best jobs, but there's other boards that have more focus and will spend more time on those elements. And so I do think the more we can do to make sure that they're considering the same things that we're thinking about, and we're not kind of fighting, and it's more like everyone's working from the same place, that would be, I think, really beneficial. And then the other thing, it was kind of a question for you. That K4C wedge analysis that I think David sent over to me, do all of the reduction goals, are those that we put in the comp plan, are those consistent with the K4C reduction goals? So that's basically pulled directly from the overarching, or have we created our own reduction targets different from the K4C ones?
Yeah, let me double check on that, but our ICAP goals and targets are consistent with K4C. If we're speaking the same language, I'll look back at the wedge and just make sure what you're speaking to is in alignment. But yes, the city's goals and targets are in alignment with K4C.
Because the question I had, and it sounds like it must add up, I know that in the overall wedge analysis, you have the state and federal stuff that's taking out a significant chunk, and it still looks like there's a very meaningful chunk that we need to do ourselves. And so I just want to make sure the math works, like that that the reductions that we're all talking about lead to the end goal of what we've projected for 2030 or what we've said we're going to get to by 2030. So that just checking that math it sounds like it's probably lines up, but we just want to make sure we validate that.
Yep, that sounds great. We can circle back on that and just confirm that, but yeah.
Okay, great. Unless anyone else, I'm not seeing any other general questions, so I guess we can get into more specific feedback or questions on the policies.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'll pull up the the document attachment 1 that was in the board packet, and maybe happy to jump around, or if folks want, we could start with greenhouse gas emission section, which was the first section.
Thank you, Jamie. For the sake of brevity, Stacy, I'm going to hit 2 important notes rather than going through one by one. If this board chooses to carry this over to another meeting, I really highly recommend that we go through this with more of a fine-tooth comb. I'm very down for that, but for the sake of trying to keep our meeting short, I want to say that I really appreciated some of the new language that's been included. We had a public comment from Ann Fletcher that would say it much more eloquently than I would, and I want to second that I had a concern about adding, about being able to add language for existing, especially existing residential buildings in our policies. As somebody who sat on the code side in PPC, I will tell you that we've had a tremendous, a very difficult time being able to apply code to existing residential and being able to have policies on that back end to be able to support it once bills like, I think that 1181 actually does support us being able to make a move. Obviously, legal can weigh in on that or not, but we've been waiting for some green lights from Olympia to be able to kind of go where we want to with our building codes for retrofitting. I will say that I think there is room for our language right here in our policies. For instance, on page 73 of our packet, which is 73 of 92, there's a new policy to support development and implement buildings and energy codes and policies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the largest source of community-wide emissions based on current greenhouse gas inventories. I think we could add language around there that talks about how we want to support existing residential uses. We've also had trouble with our code being able to put mandate things like electric charging being ready in new building residential. I think there's space for that as well. Right now, it's LU policy K2, which is about community resilience and well-being. Strategy number 1, I think, might be a place to be able to add that kind of language. We also have really great language that talks about specifically our resources, LU Gold J for natural systems and water resources. And it talks too about being able to give better education to our community. I think it would be an interesting idea to talk about having policy that in effect helps to educate the public by putting in systems that will help them to get to where we want to go. And I'm going to use a quick story. I was at Lake Sammamish State Park recently. There's a tap, a spigot to be able to get water. And there was a family who was choosing to leave the spigot on as the child was playing and going and letting it drain, right? And there was only so much time that I could do before I said, hi friends, do you think when we're not using it, we could turn off that spigot to be able to conserve our water resources, right? That was something that was surprising to them and not a value that they shared with me, right? But if we had installed something like a pedal for someone to be able to use the same way that we would with a water fountain, then we would be able to basically circumvent that, right? I think there's a role for education. I think there's also a role for having a policy that says, how do we look at how we're interacting in our environment to be able to do it in a better way to conserve our resources? And I think we can make that a policy rather than getting into the nitty gritty that helps to form our allegiance of community information and being able to also access our policies that talk about conservation in a way. So I think that there's a little bit of room to be able to do that in natural resources. So thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Stacy, were you saying something?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say
Sorry.
thank you, Joy. I wasn't able to jump around to the specific policies fast enough, but we will circle back to the recording and get those comments or look forward to your written.
Happy to go offline too to be creative about how we can add policy language. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I had, and this touches on a few different policies. I appreciate that we have specific targets for a lot of the greenhouse gas related ones or vehicle miles traveled, et cetera. It does feel like in some cases, like vehicle miles traveled, decrease energy use in new and existing buildings by 25%, for example, that we have a goal, but we haven't actually set out like, and there's sort of a gray area between what should the policies in ICAP, for example, take care of versus what should be in comp plan. But I do worry that we've not actually given enough breadcrumbs on what, like how we think that's actually going to be achievable. And so that's something that it cuts across a few different elements of this. But I think what we're going to find with a lot of people that set goals on greenhouse gas emissions is like actually getting to the targets is incredibly difficult. And so if we don't have hypotheses on how that's going to happen, it's probably not going to happen. And so I do think if there's anything we can add, I don't have specific recommendations, but that just seems like an area that the more we can do to ensure that we're painting the picture of like, what do we actually need to do to make that happen in this document? I think Connie said it really well, that like, we need to make sure that those kind of strings tie back in a way that, that we can really point to what's important and how we think we're going to do it. So that's a nebulous statement, but hopefully helpful.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments or questions from anyone? Tom, go ahead.
Yes, Tom Anderson here. So some of our comments from the public remind me of a topic that we've touched on before, and I forget whether it was in this context or not, but that has to do with traceability. How do we make sure that our lower level policies and procedures are fulfilling the high level requirements of the comprehensive plan or some other high level planning document? And this is completely analogous to, in the engineering world, requirements traceability. We have some high level requirements. Let's verify that they trace down to lower level requirements and that they trace to design elements and that they trace to implementation elements, etc. This is standard operating procedure in many domains. And that sort of approach could be taken to planning documents at a civic arena such as this, to make sure that every element there, it maps to something at the lower level and that the objective is achieved by whatever is down there. So I don't know, I just want to make the suggestion that this could be part of a more rigorous method of verifying completeness of our planning and implementation documents. By approaching the traceability of such requirements in a more systematic way. Just a thought to kind of address some of those comments we've had from the public about, hey, there's a disconnect between these flowery words at the top and the policies at the lower level. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I had a question that I actually realized I probably should have asked when in the sustainable purchasing policy, but I think is relevant here as well. The city, so the purchasing policy that we reviewed, does that cover infrastructure projects or is that for operating expenses?
Oh, so it would impact both. I'll say, since that's more guidance, the idea and one of the ICAP actions is to develop a sustainable infrastructure policy. So the way I'm viewing it is sustainable purchasing policy is more of the overarching policy, and we're going to be drilling down more into infrastructure with more policy coming.
Okay, thank you. I do think one aspect that isn't really covered here, at least from my read, was this is the purchasing side, like what we want the city to be doing on the purchasing side. I think we sort of indirectly there's a new addition of like reduce embodied carbon emissions in construction through recycling. I'm not clear if that, I think that's citywide. I do wonder if there's something that more specific to actions that the city can make in the decision. And I don't know what it is, but both across operating and the infrastructure projects, a statement that we can have in the comp plan that can tie back to when these policies get rolled out.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Jamie. We do have something in, I believe it's in the environment element around tying budget back to climate and sustainability. So I could see something around purchasing kind of being similar to that goal and policy. So David and I could work on some language for that.
Good, Joy.
Thank you, Jamie. If nobody else has things, then I'll definitely fill the space. So on kind of the vein of the cool roofs technology that we were talking about offline, Stacey, what I was thinking about with this is that, right, when we think about, the teeth is in the code, our policy allows us the avenue of our aspirations and being able to say where we want to go with the community. And it's hard to be able to enact code where we don't have policy support. So when we had earlier comments from Connie Marsh, she's absolutely right that we need to have really heavy guidance language to be able down the line to be able to support the choices that we're making with our code. That being said, I'm wondering if you think it would be appropriate for us to have policy language specifically like in our resilience and well-being section, which is LU goal K for those following around, for being able to say, we having a policy that talks about emerging technologies and being able to utilize new technologies, being able to have places to amend code, right? When we know, hey, we're these things coming up. As I was reading it, I was thinking on what I was putting on my Title 18 and being, because I've done a lot with our design manuals for Old Town, for Central, being able to say, wait, this doesn't jive. I don't think that if I wanted to put in this new technology that I could based on the code, and then being able to be like, well, if we want to do that, that means that next year, 2024, that would need to be discussed by council and put on for our comp plan in, the January-February timeframe, right? So my brain's thinking about these things and being like, oh, well, how would we do it and amend it? But then to go further back, do we need to have language in our policies that helps to support green technologies as they're emerging, to be able to be giving a highlight to our planning policy commission and to our council and to our administration and staff to say, hey, this is relevant. This should be an important focus for us because we have policies that say there should be an emphasis on emerging green technologies within the community in a way that may contradict, some of our current code. I don't know if that's might be a good policy. I don't know that we nail it, but.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stacey, I realize I have a better way to describe what I was saying earlier, where right now we have a lot of instances where policies are achieve a 15% reduction or achieve a 25% reduction, which in my mind are goals. Like our goal is to reduce to those targets. And so I do think that might be where I'm feeling that we have goals as policies, which I like the goals. I like what's written there, but I'm curious what the policies are that support getting to that goal.
Yeah.
So it seems like there may be some things that are kind of, we might need to add some of the kind of supporting materials there and potentially move some of the percentages into the goals.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, a lot of these were just pulled over with how they were incorporated previously from the ICAP. And I think David and I will need to work with Stephen's team on organization, but these may, yeah, we can think a little bit about that. But I think also that clarification of the policies under, because you're right, this doesn't necessarily read like a policy.
Nancy.
So this could be somewhere else in the policies, but since the comp plan is a citywide document and it should then guide like the school district and Eastside Fire and Rescue and even the chamber members or something. It seems to me that we should be identifying ways to get them to move in these directions as well. And that's got to be an overarching goal. I don't think it fits here, but we have to bring others to the table to be successful in meeting our goals and to be successful in implementing these policies in the comp plan. So somewhere in the whole document, we need to bring those other players to the table, including the state, federal government, and others that are interacting in that community.
Great. Thank you.
Go ahead, Joe.
Chair, I'd love to piggyback on what Nancy was saying. I love the idea of having a policy that supports like effectively our stakeholders. And an example could be obviously the recent massive procurement of gas-powered school buses, right? That was recently done. If we had more specific policies in place, specifically around stakeholders that we know we're regularly interacting with, the school district is a great one to specifically kind of tailor some things to be able to say, these are our community expectations with our stakeholders. These are the values that we have environmentally. And because to be able to stand on a leg of saying, no, this isn't something we want to support from the administration as they come, we need to have those policies to kind of back that. So it's an interesting idea to think about as a component of stakeholders as a policy, right? How are we interacting? Because we're not isolated in any one thing, right? David can work really hard on procurement on this one little part, right? But there's all these layers and effects that are end up happening. And so I love the idea of talking about as community policies in effect.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, great suggestions.
All right, and I think we are kind of running up against time.
Yeah.
So like we mentioned at the start, if you have additional comments, please send over to Stacy and David. And let me know or let us know if there's any concerns, if anyone feels like there's anything that needs to be discussed in a future meeting. And we can take that into consideration. But otherwise, if you don't feel that way and you're comfortable sending via email, please go ahead and do that. Stacey, is there anything else that you needed on this topic?
No, nothing else needed. Just to share too that David and I are in regular contact with our east side cities in particular, and really learning from them, seeing what kind of goals and policies they're putting in place, and they're doing the same for us. So we're doing a lot of sharing. You may see some new goals or policies emerge if we get some good ideas from our neighboring partners. But for some of the suggestions tonight, we'll also see if they have anything already drafted that's relevant we could bring to you. I'll send out some next steps over email and that request for written comments. And then I'll also work with Jamie as well as Stephen to determine if we'll do a special meeting in the early fall or if we can spend more time and cover this at our October meeting.
All right, thank you, Stacey. And now I think we move from our normal or main agenda items to reports.
Great. Yeah, as I'm trying to do now at each meeting, our last meeting, I think it was a written update because we ran out of time, but just want to provide some council updates. The most relevant thing that's coming up for council in the next couple of weeks is that on Monday, they will have the Community Energy and Efficiency Program grant on the consent agenda. That's to approve funds for the fuel switching incentive for our heat pump campaign. It's a $1,500 incentive for moderate income households. That's going to be run through City of Issaquah. The other item that's coming up at a council committee on Tuesday is the Pioneer Program. Jen Davis Hayes, our economic development manager, will be speaking with the council committee on that topic. I'm flagging that because she did also provide a written report to the board on sustainability incentives related to the Pioneer program. And then just wanted to flag those 2 written reports that you received, one on 6PPD from our Public Works team. Please feel free to reach out to Julie with any questions on that. And the second one, as I just mentioned, from our Economic Development team on sustainable incentives for Central Issaquah related to the Pioneer program. She's planning to either come to our October meeting to talk more about this or provide a more in-depth briefing for the board in October. And then just wanted to flag a couple more items, upcoming topics for the environmental board, digging further into the comp plan. That is going to be a focus over the next few months. So we'll be continuing to talk about the environment element as well as related goals and policies and other elements. We'll also get a sneak preview on the greenhouse gas inventory soon. And then David and I will be preparing a report on the ICAP for council in October, and we will share that with the board as well. And then, yeah, go ahead.
A quick question on the Pioneer program. Am I understanding correctly that the city is evaluating ways to incentivize more development, but potentially there's some strings attached, and we're proposing potential strings that would be attached? So
that's my understanding. I've had about a 10-minute conversation with Jen about that, but one option for incentives is sustainability incentives. And so I think there's going to be some further discussions on if that is an incentive that is included. And if so, we would definitely engage the board on what those might look like. And then just wanted to highlight 2 exciting things. This Saturday, if you're not aware, is Salmon on Sunset at the Fish Hatchery from 10 to 6. It's their 2nd annual one. It was a really great event last year. Excited to see it this year. We will have the Climate Action Challenge booth out there. And then the last thing is David and I will have a new team member, Kathleen Hillary. She's an AmeriCorps Civic Spark Fellow. She's going to be starting with us next week. She'll be with us for 11 months. She's really going to be focusing in on climate resiliency, and that will, part of her work will include supporting us in getting through the climate resilience goals and policies for the new element of the comp plan. So we'll have her join a future meeting soon. But excited to have her on and her focus of on the climate resilience work. That is it for reports and updates. Any questions from the board? All right. And lastly, just wanted to thank Chris. Chris took time out of his evening to be with us, given David and I couldn't be there. So huge thank you to Chris. And then just a early congrats to Jamie and David, and good luck this weekend.
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you, Chris. I think unless there's any other business from the board, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.